Deadmau5 Masterclass Summary. This is all about introduction to the synthesized sounds and how synthesizers work in general. So again, this was not a perfect course, of introduction to synthesis and things like that. That theme has been continuing in the class. So Deadmau5 is basically trying to introduce the topic to you, and then you're supposed to go out there and learn on your own a bit more. So the main theme of the whole section was that once you've learned the basics of synthesis, then you can basically use any plugin and go in there and start messing around with it without having it totally mystify you. So just knowing the basics of sound demystifies the entire process for you, right? So basically what Joel is saying is, one of the main point he's saying is that all synthesizers are more or less the same. So they all use the same components to generate sound. For instance, the cutoff filter will act the same way in a physical synth and a software synth. And it's usually has a dedicated section in a plugin or a hardware synth that you have. So once you know what a cutoff filter does, you know exactly what that does in every synth. So you can go there right away and know, okay, there's a cutoff filter right there. So that's what he means. If you know all the main portions of a synth, it becomes easier to work with every synthesizer. Then he moves on to explain that we're here to create sounds that no one's heard of, right? So I guess what he means is it's very difficult to sound original with presets, right? So you have 50,000 presets out there, and they're used to the nth degree. And what he's saying is that you can take those presets, and that could be a starting point, but you need to do some post-processing of that sound to make it different. You need to maybe tweak the preset, meaning knowing the different sections of the synth that you're working with will allow you to figure out exactly what to do in there to modify the sound. Okay, so nothing wrong with starting with presets, but it's always good to know exactly what to do in a synth and actually dial in your own settings and go with that, right? But if you do need to go with a preset, he's recommending that we change the sound to be unique. I think it's a great way of looking at it. Instead of just kind of plopping on a preset and calling it a day, just spend another 10 minutes to just modify it a bit to make it different. So that's a good way to look at it. Like I said, he goes through some basics of a synth, but they were more or less muddled, meaning this is not a course you take to learn how, for synthesizers. What you need to do is go take another different course that goes through the synth you're interested in, or start with the synth you're interested in, and then learn all the basics of it, and then that'll teach you the basics of a synth. And so I'm going to go ahead and post some videos. I found this really cool 3-part series from like 1970 something. It's all about just the basics of a synthesizer, and I love the fact that it was so crappy quality, and the guy was funny in it. But the quality is so crap that when you're trying to learn that stuff, you're forced to say, okay, how does that apply to my synth again? Because each time he's talking about some other 1970s synthesizer that you have to now try to mimic on something like Serum, right? So I love that fact that you have to think. Right, so there's 3 parts, and I'm gonna go ahead and paste them in the description below. Check them out; they're awesome. I have them downloaded to my iPad. I watch them all the time. I think they're great. There's also another series that Steve Duda, I don't know how to say his last name, but Steve made, who made the Serum plugin, and he talks about the Serum, synth, and he goes through every single section. So. You can learn a lot through there. So, whatever synth you have, go figure out the tutorials to learn exactly what it does, and that's kind of part of the whole thing about this particular day 7 lesson plan. Okay, so also then lastly, Joel's saying that experimentation is again the key here, right? Like how we did in days 1 through 6, where experimenting with chords was how you developed a chord, right? So you sat down in front of a computer and you started, or an instrument, and you started just dialing in notes and things like that to come up with chord progressions, right? If you're not a piano virtuoso. But here, same thing applies. You're gonna be dialing in settings and looking at different things, patching different stuff to try to make something come out. So it's also experimentation. It's not, you're never going to know all the settings possible to dial in that perfect sound. Sure, you may know that, okay, for a pluck sound, I need the following kind of envelope. I need the following kind of starting point, right? I get it. So what type of cutoff filter you need to have for a pluck sound, whatever. Like you have some basics that you learn, but to make a unique sound, you have to go back and then take your basic knowledge of a synthesizer and experiment. Okay, and that's the only way to generate the sound that you really that could be called your sound. Okay, so also another point that Joel made was that he made a good point about software synths and hardware synths, and his point was that his view of the world is that if he wants to put a pluck or a sound, if he wants to put a sound in the foreground, meaning that's the main sound, he tends to go with an analog equipment to try to generate that sound because it sounds better, right? I mean, to my ear, of course, there's a big difference, and I can hear the sound difference there. So that's what he's talking about. He's saying that if there's a main sound that you need to generate for your track, try to go with an analog synth. In my case, if you don't have an analog synth, what I did was I got a synthesizer called Diva, D-I-V-A, and it tries to mimic an analog synth. I mean, sure, it's not going to be perfect, but I compared waveforms to waveform, and I was listening very closely, and boy, it comes really close. I mean, it's just like I couldn't even really tell the difference between it and a Moog, or a Moog, however you're gonna call it. But so there was an online comparison someone did, waveform to waveform, and yeah, even the cutoff filter, was really nice, and it sounded analog, quote unquote, to my ears. So check out that synth. It's called Diva, D-I-V-A. It's a little pricey, but it went on sale and I got it under Thanksgiving. But it's totally awesome, and I've used it already once to create a track, which I'm going to release in a week or so. But yeah, it's awesome. Okay, he also then went into creating his pluck for his Deadmau5 signature pluck, quote unquote, for the kind of pluck he used in the Veld. So I've got all the settings dialed in right here in Serum. But I will go ahead and show that to you in the next video, a separate video for that pluck.